Osiem, Tanoya, Tanoan Sayam and Siaya, Sayoyakwa, Tlachin Newman, One Hot and Squalwin, Nata Uns, Latashkwa Shamain, Tanalachan Osahano Kameo, Sko Omashoth. Greetings to all of you. I will now share a welcome song from the Squamish Nation. The song belongs to the Matthias family. I have the honor to share this song with you today. OCM. Hope, hope, she, hey, a chaya. Hope, hope, she, hey, a chaya. Ho, hey, hey, hey.
Tansinin Boujou. Hello, my name is Craig Setti. I'm the coordinator of the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, known as IPERC, at the CanSol CKD network. I'd like to acknowledge and give thanks to all those who were involved in the creation of the video that welcomes us and starts us on this journey of land acknowledgements and highlighting the importance and relevance of land acknowledgements. To introduce the framework of this learning series called Supporting Each Other's Journey, I'm going to share the 4 L's as directed by the Wabishke Bijigoskanj Learning Pathway and also part of the training and mentorship efforts of the CanSolve CKD network. The 4 L's are looking, listening, learning, and leading, and each of the following sessions will cover one of these L's. We begin this webinar, the first of the Land Acknowledgement Learning Series, with a letter narrated by Mary Beaucage in response to a land acknowledgement exercise that she facilitated with a group of non-Indigenous researchers. Her experience prompted the creation of this 4-part learning series with the goal to educate members within the CanSolve CKD network, as well as those within the broader society who are interested and willing to learn.
Acknowledging the land is a First Nations tradition that goes back generations. It's a means of rooting yourself in the place that you gather. Traditional greetings will vary by region, but generally mention who I am, where do my people or family come from, what is my purpose, where am I going, and thanking the land and nature that is hosting you. Here is my example. Mary Beaucage Nishtakaz, Bising Dunjaba, Robinson Huron Treaty Nunjaba. My name is Mary Beaucage. I'm from Nipissing First Nation and Robinson Huron Treaty Territory in northeastern Ontario, and this is my homeland. Land acknowledgements are not exclusive to one group or side. We are all treaty people. If you live on this land, you are part of a treaty relationship. It's imperative that you prepare a land acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is one step to relearn the diverse nations that existed and continue to exist across Canada. The British Crown and First Nations negotiated and signed many treaties before Confederation. The intent of these treaties was to deliver mutual benefits. First Nations signed as independent, self-governing nations. Although many treaties were signed more than a century ago, treaty commitments are just as valid today as they were then. They are meant to be upheld and stewarded by us and our generations before and after. Language is important. We are not Indians, Aboriginal, or Native. Think of it this way. Indigenous is an umbrella term, and under it, the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. All are unique. All have differing relationships and history with the Government of Canada and the provinces. It is up to you to learn about this. The land acknowledgement that you create has to come from a good place. It can be as long or as short as you feel is right for you. It can include history or facts that you've learned. It shouldn't be solemn. It should be uplifting and positive. Your acknowledgement is a living statement and should be written in present tense. Land acknowledgements can seem intimidating at first. It might take you out of your comfort zone. If you're in a situation where each person is stating their city and territory and you reside in the same area as them, it's important for each of us to say it, even if it seems repetitive. The city and territory each bear equal weight. The more you say it, the easier it becomes and you will feel more comfortable. Once you feel that comfort, take the next step. Move on from reading a pre-scripted land acknowledgement and include your own reflections. You will become a leader in this practice. As an Anishinaabe woman, I appreciate you doing the work and hearing you share your acknowledgement. It is very important and meaningful to me. Do I want to speak up and help you pronounce words that are foreign to you? Yes, but as a mother watches her baby walk, I have to let you learn. Regarding pronunciation, I sometimes think of using big, long technical terms. If you can learn to say complex terms, the name of a territory you live on can be learned as well. Don't shy away from using proper names in your acknowledgement. They add significance and decrease the erasure of Indigenous nations and their territories and homelands. Indigenous languages are beautiful and descriptive. The words can also be tricky. Phonetic pronunciations are available, and so are people who can help you with words and names. Take some time and visit an Indigenous Friendship Center or contact a nearby community. Reach out to colleagues. Ceremonies and gatherings can be opportunities to connect with people and the land. There's a tangible relationship that can take place and provide meaningful connections. Go with a humble heart and don't be afraid to ask. People will always guide you. My challenge to you is to find out what treaty territory you live on. Why is that treaty or unceded territory significant? Take those teachings and use them to help you foster your relationship to the land and the Indigenous peoples in your area. This is one small step towards reconciliation. A young knowledge keeper said that we will be ancestors one day, and our actions and inactions will affect the ones to come. It's always stuck with me because we think of the 7 generations before us and the 7 generations after with every action we take or decision we make. Miigwech.
This first webinar focuses on looking. We have a group of CanSolve CKD network members participating in a facilitated discussion with cultural safety consultant Harley Eagle. Harley resides on Vancouver Island, BC, and he and the network members will now tell you a little bit more about who they are and where they come from. I'll pass it over to them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you everybody for being on this call today. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory that I'm on. I'm on the unceded territory of the Comox people here on Vancouver Island. It's wonderful to join with you today and to facilitate this conversation around land acknowledgements. So if we could do a round of introductions, that would be wonderful. And perhaps I'll start just so that you know a little bit about myself too. And then we'll go in the order that I suggested. So once again, my name is Harley Eagle. I'm very thankful to be with you today. I'm Dakota and Anishinaabe, originally from Saskatchewan, but I've been living here on Vancouver Island for about 25 years in total, off and on. I've been able to live in places like Winnipeg and in South Dakota and in Florida and in Vancouver for a short time as well. These days, I'm a cultural safety consultant. I'm working across sectors, mostly in healthcare, but certainly in other areas as well. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Amit.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Amit Garg. I'm calling from London, Ontario, which is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Adirondack peoples, who are the original and ongoing caretakers of this land, which I call home. My parents immigrated from India a year before I was born, and I was born and raised in Sudbury, Ontario, because my father worked for a mining company there in the lab called Falconbridge. And since my adult years, I've been studying in Southwestern Ontario, both Toronto and Hamilton and London. And now I've been on faculty as a staff nephrologist here in London, Ontario for almost 20 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joanne Kappel. I am situated on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I am a white settler. I was born in Saskatchewan on Treaty 6 territory in a small town called Kindersley. I've lived almost my entire life on Treaty 6 territory, except for 2 years when I lived in Toronto doing my fellowship for nephrology. I've been a nephrologist now for 30 years. I presently the provincial medical lead for kidney health for Saskatchewan, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I'd like to also mention that I'm one of the project leads for the CanSolve CKD network and one of the co-chairs for the Knowledge Translation Committee for the CanSolve network. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mila Tang. I'm a project manager for the CanSolve network. I came here, I'm on the lands of the unceded territory of the Squamish, Coast Salish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in Burnaby, right here, where the Coast Salish people collect arbutus bark for medicinal purposes. So my family, my mom and dad immigrated here when I was just a little girl, just when I attended elementary school until my university and postgraduate degrees here. And yeah, I've been in kidney research for, I think, 13 years now. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversations today. I am prompt and expecting to have discomfort, and I embrace it. So I'm really looking forward for growth. Thank you.
And Ken, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ken Litchfield. I live in traditional territory of Region 7 and of Treaty 7. And I've lived throughout Alberta and had the pleasure of living on Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 lands. The Treaty 7 people, from which land I'm proud to call my home now, I certainly want to acknowledge the people of the Tsuut'ina Nation, the entire Blackfoot Confederacy, really, the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani North, which reside in Alberta, as well as our Stoney Nakoda Nation as well. And of course, Métis Region 3, which I also reside upon. So I also am a kidney patient. Very blessed to be a kidney patient and a recovering one with the optimal treatment of a transplant. So I've worked professionally in the health and safety industry nearing 30 years and look forward to being a big part of today's program.
Well, thank you very much, panelists. And now we'll go into the process for this discussion. And so what we thought we would do is ask you 2 questions for each of you to respond to. And then if there's time at the end, we'll have a little more of an open discussion based on some of the things that you might raise in your comments. So the first question that we have for you is, in terms of your work and your journey in incorporating land acknowledgements, what are 1 or 2 main things that you've learned on this journey? And I'll turn it over to Amit.
Yes, thank you. So in thinking about this, I've been thinking about this most of the week, actually. Again, thank you for giving us the questions earlier on. And first, I was kind of also reflecting on my own history. So as I mentioned earlier, my parents were from India and they immigrated here a year before I was born. And there I see a lot of similarities with some common history in terms of both a spiritual connection to the land and nature in terms of traditional Indian values, a respect for elders, importance of family, also an experience of colonization, in this case by the British, and how that was associated with several atrocities. And some of the themes, when I was there, when my mother was on sabbatical, I studied in India and definitely themes of racism, assimilation, oppression, and the multiple methods by which that can be done through economic, government, a whole host of things is there, and potential concerns of racial superiority. So I just wanted to say that beginning in terms of when I was reflecting on this is something that came to mind to me personally. So when I've been thinking about what I've learned about land acknowledgements, first I would say that I'm continuing to learn. And so I'm just saying what I've learned so far. And first of all, words are not enough. It's not just a script. It's something you're supposed to speak from the heart. Actions certainly are always more important than words. It contributes to a sense of justice and what is fair, and contributes in this context to decolonization. It's an acknowledgement of recognizing a history of wrongdoing. When doing it, you should be taking your time. It should be thoughtfully delivered and respectfully. And I've learned that it doesn't have to be given only by an Indigenous person, and that it can be done in different ways. I've seen it done both verbally and visually, long and short. It's reflecting on it when I was saying Haudenosaunee, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but even that term itself has a whole history and has multiple things behind it. And so when you start by saying it, then you think about it and then you learn about it more, and it brings all these things to the thing. And I'll stop there. I have a number of other comments, but I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Amit, for that. I think your reflections are very deep, and coming from a person who was not born in Canada or of the white privileged society. I think those are important comments. And so I think what I've learned about land acknowledgement is that for me, it's a really good starting point for my own engagement in reconciliation. But knowing, though, that a land acknowledgement isn't the end of reconciliation. And like Amit, I think actions are more powerful than words. Although sometimes you have to start with words. And the other thing that I've learned in this journey is that you actually have to do research about the history of the land where I am on now, or the history of the land of where I'm going to, before I develop or write a land acknowledgement. Because not all communities are practicing or recognize land acknowledgements. So you have to do some research about where you're going or where you are. And if I am using Indigenous people's names or places or tribes, I try really hard to find the right pronunciation, but I have to tell you, I suck at languages. My brain is a science math brain, and I am not very good at languages. You just have to ask my husband and my use of Spanish, actually. So because of that, sometimes I'm paralyzed by fear that I'm going to do it incorrectly, and then I'm going to offend someone. And that makes my stomach hurt. And so, but you know, you have to keep doing it. So you have to keep learning, and the more you know, the better your land acknowledgement or my land acknowledgement will be. And having said that, you know, land acknowledgement and learning is lifelong. And so a land acknowledgement that I do today is the land acknowledgement of today, because it's a living, breathing entity. And it's going to change as I learn more and as I progress more in whatever I'm doing. And I think I'll stop there as well, Amit, because there are a lot of other things that I have learned too.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak about what I've learned about land acknowledgements. This is Ken Litchfield. Recently, just engaging with an elder in my local Tsuut'ina community, the elder mentioned to me that they pray continually that the people of their community and of their nation do not forget the Creator, and they feel it's the ultimate in land acknowledgement. And so honestly, I really had to examine a lot of my activities in life. You know, as a health and safety professional, land acknowledgement has been a very large part of what I have done as part of my occupation. And I think it has, truthfully, it is very aligned as to who I am as an individual at a core value level. I've learned from my very earliest memories to learn and respect and honor all of those who come before me and before us, and establishing this as part of my being throughout. You know, I've established a long-standing relationship with the earth, and as an avid defender of this beautiful planet that we have, I've learned a tremendous amount to steward, you know, the protection of the land that gives me great bounty. But preparation is one of the things I think is key for me about land acknowledgements, and ultimately, you know, learning to deal with multiple resources. Some of the resources are very much colonialized, and I found a lot of the information to be very much off-putting. And I saw it as a key potential struggle for people in land acknowledgements, because I was looking to source materials, you know, within my area. I challenged my own paradigms happily, and was able to discover some things in my community that were long-standing stereotypes. And I'm very happy to have discovered, you know, some of the differences that I've done while researching land acknowledgements, and gaining a greater understanding of the stewards of our land.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I think I'll speak to what you said on challenging paradigms in a second, but I just want to start from the beginning of how I got introduced to land acknowledgements. So I think CanSolve as a network, we started doing it around mid 2017. That was like 1 year into forming this network. And that was when I first heard of it. And during that year, maybe I wasn't noticing before, or suddenly I see it everywhere in events in my community. I heard it at school events. I heard it at summer concerts. I heard it at political speeches. And then I was more aware of how the nations of in the area that I am, where I live in. And at first, when we started doing it, or I started doing it, I struggled a lot with the names of the nations, same as Joanne. And it's almost like this is the least that we could do, is practice the correct pronunciation. Is a sign of respect. When you get people's names right, it's an important thing. And I think only recently in the network, it opened me up into a deeper meaning for land acknowledgements. And then you start thinking about the words that you say in the land acknowledgements. What's unceded territory? It means that it was never legally signed and given over. And what is the history of the land that I'm standing on? How was the land in its natural state compared to what it is now? So like it's just having that curiosity about what the land acknowledgement is about. And more recently, the reflection I have is just learning the connection people have with the land, like the life that it supports and it nourishes, the food and shelter it provides, the memories made on it, the energy it gives you, the connection to the creator through its beauty, and even just simply giving you space, especially in this COVID time. Like you go out and like this feels wonderful. And I mean, I experienced those things, but I really never acknowledge or realize that, oh, it's the land that plays a big part in that experience. So yeah, I think I'll stop right there. And I think we'll get into this and the importance of it later. But what Ken mentioned about the paradigm shift is, I think it's something I would like to unpack through this conversation.
All right, thank you all for those responses. And now moving on to question 2, and I know in just listening to your answers to the first question, I think you've provided some of the answers to the second question as well. The second question is simply, why are land acknowledgements important? And the way that I was thinking about this question was in terms of those folks that might come to you and ask, you know, like, or trying to work through wondering if they should provide land acknowledgements. So it's kind of like that. What would you say to them? Why are these land acknowledgements important? What comes to mind when that question is raised? We'll go back to the order that we established earlier. Thank you.
You're on mute, Amit.
Sorry, thank you. So reflecting on this, I think land acknowledgements are a sign of respect, dignity, understanding others, honoring others. And I think that's a common value shared by all global citizens. You want to make sure you're interacting with others in a respectful way. Through this process, I've understood why this is particularly important to Indigenous peoples. And through the land acknowledgement, you learn more about colonization, its impact. That includes everything from a lot of the exercise we're involved with in CanSolve, including the blanket exercise, residential school, understanding. I think it contributes to reconciliation. All people on this earth and all cultures have a right to self-determination, and it also respects that. In some ways it's a simple act, but I think it can be transformative. It acknowledges, in this context, the spiritual relationship Indigenous people have to the land, but it's beyond just territorial consideration. It's much broader than that. And by participating in land acknowledgement, you don't want to contribute to colonial disruption. So you're kind of being a part of a movement where you're making a space where we can get beyond that and look forward to a brighter future for everyone.
Thank you, Amit. I agree with what you've said. And I also think that that if a person was coming to me to ask, should they or how do they do a land acknowledgement, I think one of the things you have to say that there is no recipe. It's not add 1 cup of flour and 2 cups of sugar and all of that kind of stuff. There is not one way to do a land acknowledgement. It really must be authentic, and it must come from your heart. And it must be respectful, as Amit has said, must be done with care. I think that there is a certain amount of reciprocity, because what you take from the land, you must give back to the land. And so I think that land acknowledgement has been perhaps a protocol, or in certain Indigenous peoples, a protocol like giving tobacco. And so that it is, you must be respectful when you give a land acknowledgement. But my fear is that this is going to become rote, and this is going to become a formula, and that you zip off that I live on Treaty 6 in the homeland of the Métis, and you do that without even taking a breath. And so that you can get on to why the people are there, why you've done that land acknowledgement, but you've done it so fast that you go like that, oh, well, that's done now, time to move on. And so I have a fear that because land acknowledgements now are ubiquitous, or near ubiquitous, as Mila has said, that they may become less important. And that would be sad. And as I said before, I'm on Treaty 6 territory. I live right smack dab in the middle of Saskatchewan, and land acknowledgements are not really done very much in rural Saskatchewan. And that maybe signifies some of the issues that we have in this province with racism and discrimination and what's happened in the past number of years in this province. So I think the land acknowledgement, why it's important, it's so that we learn about the ancestors, the people that were on this land, and that we must do it with respect and care and humility. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. I think one simple answer to this question of why land acknowledgements are important, I would say it's an opportunity. Humans are forgetful, at least some more than others, me included. And I think the words matter. I think words as a reminder bring about, it reminds us of where we are. And I think it does help. Yeah, it's an opportunity to bring truth and awareness, not just to the people that are in the audience, but also to yourself included. It's an opportunity to look deeper and pointing to a path down cultural humility. So like when we first started with land acknowledgements, not all people were thrilled. There were a lot of pushback and saying the agenda's packed, it's a room full of busy people, this doesn't get priority, basically. And I feel like another human condition is we try to always deal with the immediate or deal with whoever speaks loudest, and we negate the important things in life. And I think this land acknowledgement is one of the ways that we can bring about truth and reconciliation, and also just not just cultural humility, but humility in general for all of us.
Thank you, Mila. I certainly agree with your points and the points of all the two previous speakers. And truthfully, when I evaluate, when I truthfully look at why are land acknowledgements important to me, I just think it comes down to the foundational core value for me of respect and demonstrating respect, not in any way, but by living it. And foundational, my personal experience is the land. I am a passionate user of the land, the water, and the sky. Its preservation is absolutely foremost in front of mind for me all of the time. And as an avid outdoorsman, backpacker, camper, hiker, kayaker, wild forager, berry picker, mushroom hunter, fiddlehead finder, fly fisherman, bow hunter, and as a trapper, I walk and talk personally and advocate to protect these passions and ultimately the land with the I think the greatest example that's ever been there, and the people of our First Nation communities across our entire land, where the gift of this land from Creator, which allows and honors me with a life's bounty, has been looked after for millennia by First Nations people. And to go back to that land acknowledgement and why it's important, well, it's a simple matter of respect and really, I think it's a bridge building exercise as well, because having delivered a lot of land acknowledgements as part of my profession, I have experienced, and very unfortunately, I've experienced the systemic racism that exists and has existed in communities while performing a land acknowledgement. And as an ally and believer in what I am doing as the land acknowledgement, I put myself in an uncomfortable place. But as an ally, I think it was important for me to advocate quell as quickly as possible, and continue with the land acknowledgement as a true form of respect. So I'm a big believer in authenticity, and when you're truly thankful for something, it's very hard to fake authenticity. So I think land acknowledgements are important to me for that exact matter and reason. Thank you.
Well, I really want to thank you all for those comments. You've all said so much. I don't think we're going to have any problem continuing this conversation beyond the questions. I just want to, so what I was thinking we could do in our remaining time is I'm going to go through the order one more time to ask if there's something that you want to add to the comments that you've made. Perhaps there's something you've missed in your reflections that you feel is important, whether that's around the things you've learned or the importance of providing land acknowledgements. So I'm going to just go through the order once again to ask that question of you. And then secondly, I'm wondering if there's questions that you have of each other, that you've noticed that somebody else has said something that you would love to either contribute to that concept that they might have said, or ask them a question about it as well. And then once we've done those two things, then I have some specific questions to ask based on some of the content that you've raised. So if we can go through the order once again, just to simply ask you if there's something you would like to add to your comments.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe one comment is that CanSolve is a research network, and as a part of interacting with CanSolve and as a part of my own further development, I went ahead and did OCAP training. And you realize in the research context, there is also history occasionally of some researchers being helicopter researchers and using data and information also to further complicate and contribute to problems rather than it being a solution. And so in the context of a CanSolve research network, I say that the land acknowledgement also is important in that respect, in that we are conducting research and generating new knowledge to the benefit of all. And when it particularly has impact on First Nations and Inuit Métis people, that we use OCAP principles, and that that we contribute to a better society and address the number of issues we discussed today already, rather than further complicating the issue and making it even worse.
I think to add to some of what we've already been talking about, sometimes it's difficult, or I find it difficult to know, do we provide a land acknowledgement at every meeting that we're at? Do we provide a land acknowledgement at every event we are at? How could I incorporate a land acknowledgement in a family event, for instance, when we can have family events again? But how would we do that? Because sometimes we do come from families or have friends that are not, that have no knowledge or have very poor knowledge about Indigenous and Métis people, and you would like to help them understand a little bit about the history of the land that we're on. So how could I incorporate a land acknowledgement into Christmas dinner, for instance, or Easter celebration? And I would really like to know people's thoughts about that, particularly yours, Harley. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I also reflecting on that point, it's like, when do we give land acknowledgements and when do we not? And I think I went down that road of, well, what are your reasons for doing a land acknowledgement? Is it for the performance? Is it for peer pressure? Is it an obligation? Is it to alleviate guilt? Is it, yeah. And I don't think those are good reasons to do it. And then I went down the road of thinking, well, what are good reasons to do it? And what makes a good land acknowledgement? It's like, if you hear it, it inspires, it challenges your paradigm, as Ken was saying. It's humbled, it makes the nations or the Indigenous groups being felt seen or heard. Maybe gratefulness. Yeah, so I think, like, really it comes down, it's a heart matter. Like, where was your headspace at and where is your heart at? And I think my struggle also is, like, I mean, I've only done this a few times in our operations meeting or the one lecture that I gave to to the undergrad students in my almata. But like, yeah, like, I think we are humans, and I think we have days where it's harder, we struggle with it more than others or other days. So yeah, and as Joanne said, some people groups, they I think reading some of the blogs, some of the communities were repulsed by it, just because it felt they had bad experiences. It might be triggering to some inauthentic way that it was given previously. Yeah, those are all questions I have, and I don't even know what the exact question I'm asking here, but maybe Harley could help articulate that somehow. Thanks.
As far as questions that I may have, I truly appreciate the circle of people, to be honest, because there's so many perspectives from which we can learn from others. And in my profession, I have seen some of the best and some of the worst as it comes to land acknowledgements, and truthfully, the appropriateness of land acknowledgements is a lot struggle with. And as far as timing, length, to me, I just look at it as an authentic form of communication with the audience that we're in. And I just would I would seek to understand a little more, a little more understanding to, what recognition is appropriate in which set. And the most important thing for me is, sorry for my Labrador, quiet, Charlie. I'll leave it with that, and would look very much forward to an answer to that question. Thank you, Harley.
All right, thank you, everybody, and you've all done a good job of incorporating questions into the further comments as well. So maybe we can delve into some of those questions now, because I had suggested for this round that it could be questions that you ask of one another. Mm-hmm. So you've already asked a few questions, but I also want to make sure that it's that maybe this is a time when we can delve into a dialogue around some of these questions. And I really appreciate, that you folks have been gathered because of your experience in providing land acknowledgements, and at the same time you have questions, and I think that's a powerful theme, a powerful learning that folks who are viewing this can gather, is that this is probably a lifelong journey and yet, even though there's so much to learn, there's so many dynamics in all of this, you're still forging ahead. You're still attempting, you're still trying. It seems like you're willing to make mistakes. You're willing to learn and at the same time to walk with integrity, to try to learn how to appropriately say a nation's name, or the way that the land was called by the Indigenous group that perhaps where you're living or working. So this is an ongoing journey, and I really appreciated Mila's comments at the very start about being uncomfortable, that's a part of this, and that she's willing to walk with that discomfort. I think that's a big part of all of this, is that we have to figure out how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that's a part of life. I think our fast-paced Western society trains us to be distracted from discomfort and be distracted from anything uncomfortable, and we do all kinds of things to keep us away from looking at those things that are perhaps uncomfortable. So if I had a question for each of you, and I think we can circle back to some of the specific questions you've asked, but what is the role in your understandings of discomfort in this journey? Can you speak to maybe some different levels of discomfort? Yeah, and just speak to how you see discomfort in terms of this conversation. Or this topic, I should say. Yeah, and why don't we just go through the order again, just to make it simple.
You're on mute, Amit.
Sorry, thank you. My children got home from school, so I'm keeping it muted when I'm not speaking. No, for me, the discomfort is doing something that would inadvertently offend someone. Again, as you mentioned, Harley, we're all learning. Same with Joanne. I'm more a science, medicine oriented person. Language is not my forte. I'm sure I pronounce things incorrectly, and by doing these things, the whole purpose is you want to show respect, and if you inadvertently offend someone, that creates discomfort, because that's not your intention. And certainly you can acknowledge that you're learning through this process, and you have a lot to learn, and you can apologize. But I'd say that's one of the biggest sources of discomfort for me, doing something that is done with the best intentions, but could not be received because of the way it was enacted through something inadvertent.
Yes, Amit, I agree with you. And one of the things that people might not know about me is that I'm actually quite shy. And so going into a new community with people that I've never met actually is very discomforting and anxiety provoking. And so you're always then sort of on tender hooks, or to try to make sure that you don't offend anyone. And so because of that, then, and because of the nature of being shy and in big groups, you tend to not say anything. And that then sometimes adds to more discomfort, sort of like a dog chases his tail. And so that's in all the council work that I have been doing, that is the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable, is meeting new people, which is really kind of weird because I meet new people all the time in my clinical practice. So it's just different, and I'm not sure how to explain it.
Yeah, so discomfort is something that I'm just recently learning to embrace. And I think thanks to COVID, I get more walks outside and force myself to prioritize on reflecting on just being a human being and not a human doing. And I feel like, yeah, there is a lot of vulnerability. You're putting yourself out there to you're opening up something, and there's risk to that. Yeah, as Amit and Joanne is saying, that you risk hurting people when your intention was to inspire. You risk, like just triggering someone to think about a bad event, or I think more importantly, you're thinking about how people will view you, and that's also something that I struggle with, and also try to understand it is important. It is important to be courageous, to stand up there, to risk it, because although you risk the hurt, you also risk the downstream effects that may be positive, such as inspiring someone to look at their own land and research into that and down that path of cultural humility. So yeah, like that's discomfort for me, and that's, I think, the reason why I'm trying to learning to embrace it, because there's growth. There is, you risk being hurt, but you also risk growth and something better.
You're on mute, Ken.
I knew that would come to bite me. Thank you very much, Mila, and the previous speakers. Mila, it resonated with me deeply when you mentioned risk. Risk is what I've done as a profession for 30 years, management of risk. And it's very comfortable in my professional discipline, but very difficult to do, I think, personally, putting yourself out there. And, I'm very, very adept at dealing with technical risks and non-technical risks, but honestly, that's why I feel the authenticity. The fear that I have is that I'm not coming across authentic. And I think I go back to demonstrating my respect for the land. For me, is just a fundamental place where I can draw level ground because of my passion that exists for preservation of the land, water, and sky. But the human fear element is there, and I'm really an open book, and I actively encourage people, if in any way I've offended them, to bring it to me and speak with me, please. The only way I can get better is by understanding, and I try to be as prepared as possible to prevent that. But no, that fear of the risk of causing somebody harm is always a concern, and deep one for me. Thanks.
Thank you all very much for engaging in the way that you are. That I think you are providing examples of vulnerability, And for me, vulnerability is an act of humility. And that's what we need to do to embrace this journey, I think, has come from a place of humility. And humility doesn't mean meekness or weakness or quietness. In fact, in my understanding of humility, the root of that word is actually referencing earth. And so it's a way of seeing the way that the earth functions, that no one part of the earth feels that it's better than the others. It works interdependently with other aspects of the earth. And I think that's what's required of us. And when you do that, when you operate in that way, that is nothing but strength, right? So I believe that humility is actually a sign of acknowledging the strength, not from within you, but through the interconnections that are reality, just as Ken is talking about, those connections to land, earth, and water, and self, in all of that, and the animals and the plants, all of that is strength. And I really appreciate, I can tell that each of you has done a lot of research, and you've done the work to prepare and trying to figure out how to articulate that even within your own self, but then how do you articulate that out? And I have a question to ask of you around identity. What's the role of identity in all of this? And I mean identity kind of in its fullness. Like, what are some of the aspects that you would like to raise for people to be aware of in this journey? Because there's identity around those things that which we try to walk with, that integrity that each of us strives to bring into our work. It might be connections, just as through the work that you folks do, and then also through things like that Ken has raised around connections to the land, and that that way of walking in this world. But then there's also identity in this world that comes from systems of oppression. And so around how we're racialized, how we're genderized, how we're able-bodied or not, all of those forms that we have in this world that seek to keep us separate, and tries to say that some are better than others based on those various things that I raised. And some of you have also talked about being an ally, and trying to walk in that way, that when you notice that there's pushback and there's discomfort around land acknowledgements from perhaps your peers, and you want to be an ally, you want to step in. And I know that sometimes that word ally can be controversial, but in my understandings of things, it's that you're putting yourself into the fray, if you will, at the same cost and same risk as others might already be in that fray. So you're leaning in, you're stepping in. And so I wonder if each of you could speak to what that means to you in terms of identity and all of its richness and fullness, but provide something that might be important for those that are entering into this journey of land acknowledgements, that they should be aware of and be willing to lean into, if you will, in terms of their identity and why it's important to notice that identity. I hope it's kind of a convoluted question, but I hope there's enough there for you to address.
Well, thank you. I think when we say identity, a lot of things come to mind. When you do the land acknowledgement, as I started off, you start thinking about your own identity in the context of it and the land you're standing on. And then also you think, of course, about the identity of the people you're acknowledging in the land acknowledgement. And Harley, to say one thing, also identity can also be unifying, right? We all share identity being global citizens, and we all are richer when we celebrate the ethnocultural diversity we have as global citizens and use that to propel the human race even further in all its richness. So I also can see identity in some ways as an optimistic view if we take that perspective.
That's a tough question there, Harley. Because identity, it comes from many things. Identity can come from your race. Identity can come from your gender. Identity can come from your spirituality. Identity can come from the people around you. And so I think that that's a tough question. You've asked a very tough question, Harley. And I think just for one thing from me, I always thought that that when you said, you know, I'm blind to race, you know, I treat everybody the same. Everyone's the same. They have the same identity, I guess. And that's wrong, because there are many things that, or many inequities and inequalities that occur if you don't take race or identity into consideration. And so, you know, being racially colorblind is probably not a good thing. And so, that's my sort of take on identity.
Yeah, Harley, this is a big question. I agree with Joanne. It's almost existential here. But I think I'll try this route. I think as in my journey with cultural humility and learning the atrocities that happen to Indigenous peoples here in Canada, it inspired me to look at my own roots. I mean, me and my mom never talked about what she did when she was my age, where she came from, how did we came to be. And we had those conversations, and it was eye-opening for me. I feel like, I'm not sure if you guys also went down this journey of just where did I come from? Where are my roots? And I feel like that's also part of my identity. I feel like, I guess when I hear about what happened and going through the blanket exercise and just seeing my my friends as patient partners in CanSolve Network, I call them my friends, of their journeys and the emotional struggles, the atrocities that happen to the communities. It feel like, okay, they lost their identity and then they had to go back and reclaim it. And it's a big journey. And in my like how that happened was because they were dehumanized. And same as Amit, I want to end, like I see it as I am a global citizen, I am a human being, and we're all one, like we can unify that way. And but I also see it like how Joanne is, like we can't just say melting pot. That term got wiped out of popular culture now. It's not melting pot, but it's I'm not sure if you saw this viral video of this person playing the piano, and it was just all the same key. And he was playing, I don't know, impromptu or some sort of music, and it just sounded horrible. It's just tapping on one key, but when you have the diversity of different notes, beautiful music comes about. So yeah, I guess what it is we need to remember that we are all humans, and if we start dehumanizing a people or people groups, then that's when inhumane things can happen.
Thank you, Mila, and the other speakers. What a lens you've asked us to look through, Harley. I've sat and had three people to prepare, you know, my own thoughts on the matter. But when it comes to identity, I think I mentioned in the beginning in my introduction about, you know, challenging paradigms. And when I look at identity, I think fractional identity is a piece that needs to be addressed more than our global identity, right? We have so many portions of life that ultimately end up peg-holed in one area or the other. But being blessed enough to travel and see the world through many different lenses myself, I've been able to, become much more of a global citizen. And truthfully, when I look at the idea of identity and how it brings forward, it's a very tough thing for a lot of people to consider. But I think ownership over your identity is a piece of it, and making active changes, improvements by learning and understanding and seeking to understand, and to improve your global identity and help break that existing little paradigm of that fractional identity that the world has marginalized people into. And I think it's a brilliant question, and I look forward to dwelling on it for the rest of the afternoon.
All right, thank you all. So I'm kind of feeling like I have a question that I'd like to ask you folks, but then I'd also like to be able to open it up for your questions of each other, or if you have a question for me as well. But I'm thinking about the need for research, the need for preparing, and what that means, because in some ways that could sound fairly easy, and I really appreciated Ken's story about trying to figter out, what is the history, and realizing there's a lot of stuff out there that's just not appropriate, and it's coming from sources that are questionable at the least, and so how do you find that authentic story that speaks from the voices of Indigenous people and from the nations itself, or themselves, that kind of research. So I'd like you to speak a little bit about the importance of that preparation and that research. And it's never finished in my mind. We're always continuing to learn and to dig and to hear and to listen to things that we've never thought about before. But the reason why I was thinking about it in terms of something that I can't remember who spoke this word, but they used the word dehumanizing. I think it was you, Mila, that I think is so important to notice and to even ask the question, so how did we get to this place of dehumanizing? So in looking at the process of the blanket exercise, you would have heard about this thing called the doctrine of discovery, which is basically the legal and moral apparatus that allows for modern day colonization as we know it. It's a series of edicts that came from the powers that were during the 14th and 15th century, so papal bulls that defined why, and said it was okay to dehumanize Indigenous people. It was okay to interact as colonial governments in such a way that produced the opportunity, if you will, for enslaving human beings and for taking of land and claiming it in the name of European forces. But I think there was another piece to it, and I think all of you have spoken to it, and that's the disconnect from our relationship with the land that happened. Because that's what the Latin byline to the doctrine of discovery is terra nullius, empty land. And not only were they saying that the land was empty of human beings and therefore you could take it, but I think it was also an ideology of the land was devoid of life. And then that makes you, allows you to do terrible things to the land. And if you see it as just an inanimate object and you don't see it any longer as your mother or as your grandmother, or as your grandfather. You know, those kinds of connections that Indigenous people throughout the world often had, and many religions have that understanding. So I think that's a way of disconnecting us from seeing each other as human beings and the land. The point that I'm trying to make is that that's a long time ago. That was in the 14th century that came up, and yet it's a legal and moral apparatus that allows for modern day colonization. But so many of us don't know about that. You know, we have no idea, even though things like the TRC have called that forward and said this must be addressed. The United Nations has called this forward and said this must be addressed. But so many of us don't know about it. But in that journey of research and preparation, you start to learn about these sorts of things that are so deep and so profound. So I wonder if each of you could speak to your understanding or what that's meant to you in terms of your own research and your own preparing yourself for this journey of land acknowledgement.
Well, one of the themes is humility, and I, as mentioned, I just feel like I'm just getting my toes wet into the area, even though I've been doing it now for a few years. So I would say I have a lot to learn. Some of the things that were described, I have been learning about in the United Nations Declaration. I also read about a bit, and you know, something tangential, but something that when we talked about discovery or setting, when the Canadian government opened up now immigration and people from many other countries came to Canada without this understanding of the history, like the you know, and then they become a part of Canadian culture. And I can think of looking now on a personal, my own parents, I can tell you quite confidently, they had no awareness of any of this, right? It's like you're in a certain country and they're saying, here's a new country and there's an opportunity here for you to develop a new life. And that takes a leap of faith for immigrants, but they want something different. And so I'm not really answering your question, but it's just a reflection, and how do we reconcile that when, like perhaps if there was this awareness, they would have said, no way, we're not moving to Canada. You know what I mean? And so, but that's a part of the history now that we have. And so to try to stay back on point, I would just say that I really don't feel I'm well prepared about anything, but I'm just learning through the process, kind of like we do in our lives. And this one other theme I just want to reflect back on. When we have these busy lives where we have, you know, in my own circles, commitment to our patients, commitment to academic activities, commitment to your families, and then you want to create space for this, how do you do in a way that I agree is not tokenism, but is authentic? But then when you have 25 hours of work to get through and you only have 24 hours in a day, do you just say, and these other things you can't just drop either, like your young children or you have patients waiting, some things you can't drop. So then how do you kind of create space for this that we all know to be important? And maybe is it appropriate to do it like not as not at every meeting then perhaps, but when you but do it when you do it really authentically and well, and make sure you create space for that. So those are some reflections. Just one with some other people mentioning what's the right, for lack of a better term, sweet spot in terms of like doing this justice.
Thank you, Amit. That was excellent. So I think the question is about how do you do research and look into this when you're doing your land acknowledgement or thinking about your land acknowledgement. And well, I come from a University of Saskatchewan that does a lot of this. And so they actually have two people, Dr. Stryker Calvez and Dr. Rose Roberts, who really most of their work is about land acknowledgement. So they're a fountain of knowledge. And actually UBC has some really great stuff as well. So, you can do those kinds of research with regards to university settings. But I found that some of the other things that really help me think about stuff is really just reading people's stories. So recently, around Christmas time, I read a book called Half Breed by Maria Campbell, who is elder within our university, who grew up not very far from where I grew up, and it was enlightening. And I just finished a book yesterday by Jesse Thessel about From the Ashes, about his journey through addictions and coming out out of addiction. So some of those things actually are really very important in research. So it doesn't have to be academic encyclopedia research or anything like that. And the other book that I've read that if people have time to read it, and it is The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. I mean, he has a lot of history in that book, and he has a very self-deprecating humor as well when he brings those points across. And so those are the things that I do to look for research. And then the other thing is I have some really good relationships with elders in Saskatchewan, in my city of Saskatoon and elsewhere, that I actually feel quite comfortable phoning up and saying, I got this problem, or I need to do this, what kind of recommendations would you have so I don't screw it up? And so that's sort of the different ways of finding out what you need to find out.
Yeah, for me, I also just try to look on the internet for the research and reflect on it. But also, I feel like if we just take a walk on the land, you can also reflect on, oh, berries grow at this time of year, and have an appreciation of the land that way. And that could also be included in a land acknowledgement. It doesn't have to be, here's a fact, here's another fact. So I think, yeah, like going back to what I have when I experience a inspiring land acknowledgement is just the person presenting the land acknowledgement does so beautifully with gratefulness, and just they do so in a humble way. Yeah. Well, in addition to just, I feel like when I do the internet search, other than the universities who have intentionally put in resources to collect up the research and put it online, there isn't really too much. And I feel like we need to call more Indigenous people's group to put content and their stories more accessible to everyone else. Well, in forms of books, as Joanne, you've read some, and I feel like it's just starting. It's just this decade has just started to boom with these type of resources and these stories on with different media. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to more of those to counter all the other versions of history that is available.
Thank you very much. Again, looking back to research, I think one of the greatest gifts in my life has been the immersion that I've had in the CANSOL CKD as a patient partner. I became, deeply involved out of necessity at my stage with kidney disease, and I became very, very close with a number of dear friends across the country that are in our IPERC group, and it broadened my knowledge. It gave me the opportunity to speak firsthand to individuals, and it truthfully opened my heart to seek understanding from people in my immediate area around my home in Calgary, and those lasting, long, deep relationships have, truthfully, when I said earlier, challenged paradigm, they really have challenged my paradigm. And when I look at when I look at what I've experienced throughout, in preparation for this, it seems very under-resourced. The quality of the resource material is at times a real challenge. It has a tendency to come very much from a colonial standpoint. And I found that embarrassing, truthfully. And, there was a lot of cookie cutter information. So I went back to what some of my dear friends had told me. And, I looked at I looked back at documents that were written by our government, excuse the phrase, but the Indian Act itself, and read the properties, and reread the Truth and Reconciliation Act, and began to look at the veil at which a lot of this activity has been conducted under in industry. And truthfully, my heart was heavy and is heavy. And I think that's why I drew the parallels I did for the love of the land that I have. And I think it's a common place for me to be authentic in acknowledging, the land, the people, the history, and my part of it. So I'm immensely grateful for today.
And if I could just add my tremendous gratitude to each of you for sharing with me your journey, your genius and brilliance. And I wish you well on this continued journey. And I hope our paths cross in the real world rather than the virtual world in the future. And I want to thank the CanSolve Network and the wonderful staff here that have put this together and inviting me to be a part of this part of the journey. Thank you.
I give thanks to the speakers on our session today. Miigwech, thank you for sharing your time, your energy, and your knowledge with us. For me, these learning experiences help me to remember the nuanced journeys that we take when we're learning about land acknowledgements. Also to remember the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities whose traditional, ancestral, unceded, or treaty territories that we're living and maintaining our relationships on are linked to our health and our wellness. We look forward to sharing more of the learning series with you. Please join our next session, Webinar 2, Listening to Knowledge Keepers Latash Maurice Nahani and Dr. Myra Laramie. We'll see you again.